Let's hope you and I do not see these players in a White Sox uniform ever again. Let's discuss who they are next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert at SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. Also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, there are a bunch of players that I want to discuss who should not be or will not be back with the club, but I want to discuss that in the second segment. That's because there are two players in the first segment I want to discuss where it might seem shocking to see them gone, but it would make a lot of sense. And finally, it's way back Wednesday, so let's discuss some of the unsung heroes for the Sox in the playoffs over the past 25 years. And this episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. All right. There are two players the White Sox could easily move on from, and they are Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets. Yet, it might seem a little bit surprising because Vaughn, did lead the team in batting average and WRC+. That's not saying much because, first of all, he hit 246. His WRC plus was 97, and the White Sox lost 121 games. Plus, Vaughn has been nothing but a replacement level player going on 4 seasons now. But why would that seem a little bit shocking? Well, he's a former top 5 pick. He's still I think he's gonna be 27 next season, and he has been productive, but again, at below or around replacement level. And if the team is looking to cut payroll, one easy way to cut a few million off the books is non-tender Vaughn a deal. And that's the other reason why it'd be shocking. You're just going to let Vaughn walk away for nothing. And obviously the risk is he is still 26. He'll be 27 next season. He could still reach his potential of being an all-star player. And you could lose him for nothing and see him flourish elsewhere, which seems to happen a lot with the White Sox these days. But I'll discuss in a moment why it's no big deal. And yes, you might be saying, hey, don't you go around Sox social media world saying Andrew Vaughn, all-star? It's kind of a bit, all right? I really don't think he's going to be an all-star player anymore. I predicted it, and I got burned. But that's not my biased reason for letting Andrew Vaughn go. In fact, I'm going to look at it very neutral. Also, this team has struggled to get on base. They were dead last in the league, in fact, last season. And Sheets did do a decent job of doing that, but he also continues to prove that he is an overrated left-handed power hitter off the bench even. That's what a lot of things, even I said during the season. Well, maybe he's just going to be nothing more than a bench player, left-handed pop. But guess what? He's not really a slugger. He looks like one, but he doesn't hit like one. And Vaughn is projected by MLBTradeRumors.com to get about $6.4 million next year, and Sheets around 2.6. And this time, I'm actually in favor of the Sox trying to save $9 million if it means moving on from those two players. I want the White Sox front office to start thinking analytically in roster construction, and part of that is following the math to show you have two players who are never going to get better. They are who they are right now. Also, you have two players that don't have, the math just says when you plug in the WAR, to get the numbers, they're not valuable. They're not going to give you any more wins above a replacement level player. Vaughn's projection for this season was supposed to hit 263 and have a 780 OPS with a 1.5 F4 and 24 home runs. Instead, he had a 699 OPS and he was a minus 0.1 F4 along with 19 home runs. And his ZiPS projections are showing he will likely fall short of them again because that's what he does. He keeps falling short of whatever you project him to be. 2025, think about this. Do you really see him hitting 265 with a 786 OPS and being a 1.1 F4 player and hitting 24 home runs? I don't. And you know who else could put up those numbers and save you about, a couple million? He's going to save you at least $1 million and come in with a built-in trade value. Josh Bell, for example. You might be like, what? Why him? Well, he's going to cost $5 million according to SpotTrack. And yes, he might be 32 and he was a minus 0.2 F4, but he did hit 249 this season. He had 19 home runs, a WRC plus of 101. So he's one one created above average, where Vaughn was 3%, 3 points below average. He had a 319 on base percentage compared to Vaughn's 297, and he projects to put up similar numbers next season. Although the only thing is timeout on his trade value. Bell's built-in trade value is cash and a player to be named later, because that's what basically the Diamondbacks sent to the Marlins this season. But still, you save $1 million, but you're going to improve in the margins a bit. And that's the other thing. The Sox front office has never really thought about how to improve in the margins. How do you get better in these key areas? Last year was, let's focus on the clubhouse culture and run prevention. Okay. How are you going to do that? Are you going to look at the defensive run saves, outs above average? Now we're just going to sign Paul DeYoung and we're going to get Nicky Lopez. Okay, but do they make you better? Is there a potential for regression? How do these numbers explain it? And also look at the costs. Again, Vaughn's going to cost you $6 million to basically be a below percentage F4 player. Why would you pay $6 million for that? Especially at a devalued position. First base, you could go find a guy probably playing in Korea or Japan right now who could give you the same production at a less cost. And like I said, I just threw out Josh Bell for you. And if you don't like that, how about you go super cheap and give prospect Tim Elko a shot? And you might be like, whoa, Todd, you're getting crazy. I'm just saying, why pay $6 million for a guy who's just nothing but a replacement level player? He's not going to be Paul Konerko and Jose Abreu. We've got enough data to see Andrew Vaughn is who he is. But Tim Elko, he's going to come super, super cheap. And he hit 289 with a 785 OPS between AA and AAA last year. Also hit 18 home runs between the two. And he has a 346 on base percentage. And yes, I want players that get on base now. I want players that can hit the ball long. And if not, they get on base. And Andrew Vaughn doesn't really do much of either. Now, yes, Elko will be 26 next season, so older prospect, but two things about him. One, he's a Mike Shirley pick. And where Andrew Vaughn is a previous scouting director pick who was just absolutely terrible, especially in the first round. And again, Elko doesn't represent the failure of the previous regime's rebuild. If you want to really rebuild again, because that's what they're saying, the front office is saying, that's what the owner is saying, that's what the GM is saying, really rebuild. Get rid of the garbage from the previous regime. And yes, when you're supposed to be a top 5 pick, you shouldn't be putting up these numbers. You really shouldn't. Now, I know, to be fair, Vaughn didn't get much of a minor league run, but would he need it? I mean, again, he's putting up replacement level numbers without getting much of a minor league run. So that's what that's my point. He's just stayed stagnant. And I think he is going to be who he is. So it's just time to move on. And part of the tanking the last decade was supposed to yield you stud players, like Chris Bryant, Javier Baez for the Cubs, or you look at the Orioles, all the guys that they got by tanking. No, instead the Sox used their top 5 picks on Nick Madrigal and Andrew Vaughn. High floor guys, low ceiling. That's the other thing. Get these low ceiling guys out of the organization. And that is all Vaughn is in the majors. He's just a guy. When you're taking in the top 5, you cannot be just a guy. I mean, heck, you could give Oscar Colas a run at first. And they did think about it last spring training under, Pedro Grifol, although Pedro Grifol buried Colas so deep, but the Sox say that they're not giving up on Colas. So there, you could go with Colas, who's at least going to give you a better on-base production. But the key is with Vaughn, you open yourself up to endless possibilities that can result in either getting better on the margins and just possibly getting better overall. And in Sheets' case, it's just time to accept that even with regular at-bats, he isn't a power hitter. He just isn't. 451 at-bats this season and just 10 home runs and a 357 slugging percentage with a career 385 slug. He's not a power hitter. I fell for it. I'll admit it. I thought, hey, left-handed power bat. Nope, he is not. The only thing he did okay this season was he had a 303 on base percentage. Otherwise, 88 WRC plus and a minus 0.9 F4. You've got to clear him out of the roster because you got to get rid of this roster redundancy. You got to get rid of a guy who, yeah, he can play right field, but he's not going to play it great. And he can play first base and he can DH. But guess what? As I just listed, there's better options potentially out there. You need to clear out the outfield of redundancy because you want to give Dominic Fletcher and Zach DeLoach, who showed some promise in September, and maybe even Oscar Colas, a chance to compete for the right field job. You got to get Sheets out of there. You also need the DH spot open for top 5 prospect Edgar Quero, because what I would do with Edgar is I'm bringing him up next year. He's starting the year with me. He's done enough to me in AA and AAA that he's the guy. He's definitely, I'm fairly confident that he's going to be a very, very good Major League Baseball player. Could make a couple All-Stars. You just see the hitting. You see how he got through some of the, some of the issues he had in the minors. And yes, he's going to run in to some challenges, but I think he's got the right temperament and the right plate approach to overcome that. So I'm going to have Corey Lee as my starting catcher next year. Hear me out. Quero, back him up just to ease him into all those details of being a big league catcher. Because the one thing is, while I could not stand Martin Maldonado being on the roster, they kind of did a nice job of having him kind of teach Corey Lee all those little details that you need to be. And you can do that in a few months. So you give Quero that type of runway, but you still want his bat in the lineup. So you DH him most nights. So getting rid of those two in Vaughn and Sheets by non-tendering them means the front office is serious, also using about data. And right now the data shows both Vaughn and Sheets are just not value players. But again, here's my fear. Their age and the hope of realizing their potential, because there's still potential there, could keep them on this roster. You know, the old way of thinking. So let's discuss who the Sox for sure should move on from in the offseason. Let's discuss that next on Locked On White Sox. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And I always say FanDuel is great for props, parlays, and futures. You can bet $10. You can turn $10 into $25 if you think the Bears beat the Panthers this Sunday as a plus 3.5 favorite, and hit the over of 41.5. That is going off at plus 250. You think the Bears will score first and it will be a field goal? Hey, that's going off at plus 320. Throw $10 on that. It can yield 32. And there are some really good numbers right now on who will win the World Series that can help double, triple your money, and even more depending on who you take. That's FanDuel.com. Now, if picking more or less is your strength, PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as quickly as 15 minutes. So let's see. Something simple as picking just more or less, available in most states, and you can get your money quick. Sounds like the place where I want to use to get my selections in. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5, and you don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks, run your game. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. As Locked On White Sox is available at places such as Apple and Spotify. And again, I'd like to think I can be a really good audio companion too. I don't think I have an annoying voice. You know, my mom thinks I'm cool. So, all right, little Simpsons reference. But, you know, again, if you're wanting to check in on the off season, you want some news and that stuff, and you're stuck in traffic, or you got to, rake some leaves or mow the lawn like I got to do tonight, I would say, hey, put me on, on there, on your headphones or on your car stereo there. And let's talk some White Sox baseball. All right. I got a whole bunch of players the Sox could move on from. And it would be like, if a tree falls in the forest, would it make a sound? Because a lot of these players that the Sox need to get rid of that I'm about to list are just no-brainers. But one player being let go will represent another closing of the chapter on the failed rebuild last decade. And yes, it failed because that rebuild was supposed to yield a White Sox championship. So for you literal folks out there, you semantics police, if you want to say, hey, Sox won the 2021 AL Central, well, it was supposed to, that rebuild was supposed to yield championships. The former GM said, a lot of times, just ask me after the parade. And instead, you got just 2 playoff wins and 1 division title. That's all you got. And not only that, the franchise rotted so bad, you lost 121 games. So yes, that rebuild failed. Another player on the list, I'm listing it. It isn't easy to walk away because I thought he was a good spokesman for this terrible team, good community guy. And another one that I'm going to list, I just like for a stupid reason. But otherwise, you could let a lot of these guys walk, and they might have to go to Japan or Korea to revive their careers, honestly. All right, so the first one to go. Easy one, Yoán Moncada. You're not paying $25 million for his constant injuries and inconsistent play because that's what his club option is next year. Instead, you're going to pay his $5 million. You're going to wish him well. Brian Ramos and Miguel Vargas, they're the future there at third. And the Sox showed they're definitely going to move on from him after he came back from missing most of the season with a hip injury and he got 1 at bat. And I think they did the right thing. And honestly, the only thing that they did wrong by Moncada is just by bringing him back. Again, unless there was a threat of a grievance, he should have just stayed in Arizona because it was kind of, it was kind of mean to just have him sit on the bench. You don't even give him 1 at bat for his few fans that he has, against the Angels when you're up 7-0. I do think that they could have handled it better by just saying, again, unless there was a threat of a grievance being filed, and Yoán shouldn't have because he should have seen the writing on the wall. Why are you going to come back when you got 2 young guys already playing at your spot? You should have just sat in Arizona, continue to use the workout facilities, continue to enjoy the Phoenix area, and then get ready to go to Venezuela like he's going to do. He's going to play winter ball to showcase yourself. Nicky Lopez, easy non-tender candidate, but again, he was a pretty good spokesman for the team. You should read Vinny Duber's piece on All CHGO or check out the CHGO White Sox podcast. I think it was Mondays where they play back the audio of Nicky talking about the season. Really good stuff. And he was a good community guy since he's from Naperville. But, when he's the guy that leads your team in on-base percentage with guys that, finish with over 350 at-bats, that says something about how bad your lineup is. He had a 312 on-base percentage, and he provides no pop. None whatsoever. And you've got to clear a runway for Colson Montgomery at some point next season. I would like to see Colson maybe start the year again at AAA just because he should have been, the people that I've had on, the everydayers would know, guys from the future Sox like James Fox said he probably should have been at AA to start the year and then came to AAA. And then you look at his September numbers and you see, okay, maybe he's starting to get it, but he still needs some time to develop. So I would have him obviously start at AAA, but you still want to have a clear runway. You don't have to worry about, we're paying Nicky Lopez potentially $5 million in arbitration next year. So we still got to get his bat in there just to justify the costs. But you got Lenyn Sosa to cover second base during the rebuild at a much cheaper price. Heck, you got Jacob Amaya who can cover short at a cheaper deal until Montgomery is ready. So when it comes to, instead of paying, because that's what MLB trade rumors projects Nicky Lopez to make is $5 million. Instead of paying him $5 million, I say let him go away, non-tender him. He can go be a bench player on some contenders team. Chucky Robinson, that's the other thing. The Sox, remember, they put him on waivers hoping somebody would pick up his salary, and everybody was like, no way. So that shows you he has no value. Chucky Robinson, I like any player who hits without batting gloves. I just do. I think it looks old school. I think it looks cool. But you can find a depth catcher like him anywhere. Chris Flexen, he was one of the few players with an F4 over 1, but you got too many young, talented arms that he's just going to get in the way. Again, give that runway. And again, he has no trade value too, since no one wanted him at the deadline. So my fear is the Sox could look at, the front office could look at him and say, hey man, he had a really good September and he can eat innings and he will still come relatively cheap. And maybe we could flip him at the deadline. You still need some assets. And I want to be like, whoa. You got a guy who puts a lot of runners on base, and what you got to do is you pray he minimizes the damage. That's who he is. And smart front offices knew that. That's why no contender traded for him at the deadline, even if he came at a rock bottom price. Move on. Michael Soroka. I was not against the idea of seeing if he could recapture his potential ace form, but he just keeps getting hurt. He was inconsistent. He showed some flashes that he could be a good long reliever, but again, he's going to come at a price that when you're cutting costs, I think you want to give more runway to some of these younger pitchers that you have in your system that, still are talented, but you just might not have a spot for them in the rotation. So see if they can be bullpen arms. Dominic Leone, thank you for helping Nick Nastrini at AAA Charlotte. However, didn't work much, and you're always hurt. So long. So, wish you the best in your future endeavors. Mike Clevenger, let's hope he's never heard from again in the big leagues. And if he wants to have a career, I hope he enjoys hanging out with his buddy Trevor Bauer in Mexico. Let's see who else is arbitration eligible. The Sox could not tender. Matt Foster didn't show much when he returned from the IL. Yeah, it was only 6 innings, but wasn't really something for me to be like, hey, let's give that guy a deal, especially since he'll be 30 next season. Justin Anderson, he's projected to cost about $1.1 million, according to MLBTradeRumors.com. I know the Sox like him. They used him a lot. He was able to eat innings late, but all he does is blow leads. He had a 1.5 whip. And again, this bullpen, if I remember the stat, blew 46 of their 54 leads. He was the poster boy for it too. And think about it. All those blown leads late is what added up to 121 losses. Look at that too in the terms of the context. Look at his numbers and say, you know what? That's not worth even 1.1 million. Let's move on. Steven Wilson, the only player in the Dylan Cease trade that you can declare did not work out, nor would give you any hope for the future. He was bad this year with a 1.59 whip, and then he was hurt, and he's also going to be 30. So long. Jimmy Lambert, I'm going to let him walk just because it's hard to come back from shoulder surgeries. Tommy John, guys can come back from that and return to pretty much the same form. But once you start messing with that shoulder or the rotator cuff, that is when you start to see decline or just not regaining your form. In fact, there are only 2 players who are ARB eligible that I would tender a contract. Eniel De Los Santos, I know it's a little crazy, but hear me out. He will be 29. He did have a 3.63 ERA and a 1.27 whip in his 15 games with the Sox after being designated for assignment by the Yankees, where he was just absolutely awful. And the Padres, I know, like if you look at his Padres time and his Yankees time, you're like, that is a terrible pitcher. But he's had some decent seasons with the Guardians, and he showed, he had some decent numbers, and he could be a reliever on the upswing on a buy low opportunity. And that, one of the things that in my covering the Milwaukee Brewers, I remember former general manager Doug Melvin said, what you want to do is, relievers are like volatile stocks. First, you want to buy low, and they're going to have, some relievers they're just going to go up. And if you buy low, that's great. And then you got to sell high. So there might be that potential there, and I believe he's only going to cost $1 million, according to MLB Trade Rumors. And then obviously you're tending Garrett Crochet, and I talked about his future on yesterday's show. All right, let's discuss some better days and the unsung heroes of the White Sox postseason over the past 24 years. Let's discuss that next on Locked On White Sox. This episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah, with hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. There's a real chance it'll be the Guardians versus the Royals, or even, I believe, no, they can't play the Tigers, but they'll definitely be playing the Royals in the ALDS. And if you want to root against both, maybe take in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and then go to Kansas City and get some barbecue, use Booking.com to book your next stay. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home teams or rival stadium. No matter what team you are rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city. From hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S., and the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all my everydayers who are sticking with me this long. I really appreciate the community we're building on the YouTube page. I believe we're now over 1,900 subscribers. Hey, let's get it to 2,000. Tell your family, tell your friends who are White Sox fans, or even if they're just fascinated by how terrible the White Sox are. Tell them to subscribe. Also, hey, same thing on, wherever you get your podcast, follow or subscribe. And if you even want to leave a 5-star review, I'd really appreciate it. All right. So the interesting thing is you and I probably hammer owner Jerry Reinsdorf as a terrible owner. I know I do it. A lot of my shows, you guys can go back and see. Definitely hammer him, and I do believe he's a terrible owner. But the previous owners like Charles Comiskey or the beloved Bill Veeck, or Veek, however you want to say it, the announcer, they just had 4 postseason appearances total. Jerry's had 7. So only Charles Comiskey can claim an extra World Series ring to Jerry, and he could have had more had he not been so cheap to the point that players actually threw a World Series and then got banned for life. But Jerry does have 7 postseason appearances. So yes, to the general population, like when you apply comparing him to the Steinbrenners or the Los Angeles Dodgers owners or the St. Louis Cardinals, he's a terrible owner. Heck, when you even compare him to the Marlins owners, potentially a terrible owner. When you compare him to the past, it's actually bad, not so bad. And that just shows you the sad state of the White Sox franchise. And again, it's not a defense of Jerry, but the reason why, it's only just to outline the reason why I'm going to do this way back Wednesday with a focus on the unsung heroes of the postseason for the Sox. I'm just going to do it for the past 24 years because they've had 5 postseason appearances this century so far, after having 6 total last century. 100 years and just 6 postseason appearances. Again, when it comes to the overall psyche of the franchise, doesn't really help, especially when you've lost 121 games in a season. Oh, God. Anyways, let's start in 2000. Even though the Sox got swept by the Mariners, you got to give Jim Parquet credit for his Game 1 start and James Baldwin for his Game 3 start. The Sox came into that playoff series with a rotation that was outstanding through most of the season, but absolutely decimated by injuries toward the end. Cal Eldred's arm finally fell off. You had that thinking that he's going to turn into a pumpkin at some point because he always had arm issues. Decent pitcher, but always had arm trouble. But he was pitching great. And then, got hurt. And it was unknown how Baldwin would be able to start because he was having shoulder issues. And he was finally realizing his potential. After being a decent number 5 starter, it was like, hey, he can actually be a good pitcher. But the Sox needed a starter who was healthy enough just to take the ball, and Parquet did with 6 innings pitched, and he just gave up 3 runs. It was the bullpen, Keith Falk, who blew Game 1. But then down 2-0 in that series. Baldwin, he towed the rubber, and he threw 6 innings of 1-run ball to give the Sox a shot to avoid the sweep. Herbert Perry in Game 3, he drove in the Sox only run too. People forget about the milkman. But the offense, Frank Thomas and Maglio Ordonez and Carlos Lee, guys that was Carlos Lee there? Yeah, he was. They were the guys that this team ran, kind of rode to the AL Central title. They just kind of went quiet, and that's one of the reasons why they got swept. 2005, the unsung hero was clearly Geoff Blum with that go-ahead home run in Game 3 of the World Series in extra innings, that marathon game. Yoán Uribe, he made that amazing catch in Game 4 in the 9th where he goes into the stands. Also, over the head of Jenks. Uribe throws out. Just the amazing defense. And yes, you can say Orlando Hernandez, getting the out and getting out of that bases loaded jam in Game 3. But I think that's very well romanticized. I don't think we give Geoff Blum enough credit for hitting that home run in extra innings, that marathon extra innings home run, where I had a 30-pack of Miller High Life in my fridge, and I was living in Milwaukee at the time. Didn't have a ton of White Sox friends in the area, so I'm on the phone with my best friend. Guy ends up being the best man in my wedding. I'm on the phone with him, and I just instinctively, I'm just getting so nervous. Him and I are doing the same thing. We just keep going to the fridge, each other, his fridge. He was in Indiana, and we're just going. We're trying to deal with that. And my roommate comes home, and he's like, "Are you drunk? And are you drinking that 30-pack by yourself?" I'm like, "No, man. I got my friend on the phone." And if you're thinking, hey, you got issues, my sister was doing the same thing down in Johnsburg, Illinois. All right, 2008. I get it. It was an extra game. Technically, it was Game 163, but in that blackout game against the Twins, people tend to overlook Ken Griffey Jr.'s time on the South Side. You might say, why is Ken Griffey Jr. a Hall of Famer listed as an unsung hero? It's because, we forget that he did play a very, very small portion of his career on the South Side. And if he doesn't throw out that runner at home in that game, Sox might not win 1-0. Also, Dwayne Wise had a decent postseason that year, and that is honestly who I would nominate as the unsung heroes of the postseason, because in 2021, you might say, what about Larry Garcia? Well, his home run is forever tainted by the Sox then paying him a ton of money to stay, and Tony La Russa then actually playing him a lot and saying, did you see his at-bats? And, it just, the front office and Tony La Russa forever tainted Leury Garcia for me. All right, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Talk about the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll be back tomorrow with a discussion with SouthsideSox.com contributor Di Billick on how to properly revolt against Jerry Reinstar. Feel free to leave comments about today's topics, about Andrew Vaughn and Gavin Sheets needing to be non-tenured along with other players the Sox must move on from. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.